Hey y'all, I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm so excited y'all came back this week. I do want to say sorry for not putting out a video last week, but it was Thanksgiving. We had family in town, and so we spent time with them, and it was such a great, fun time for me and my family, my kids, everything. We are back. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving that celebrates. And again, thank you for being here. I'm so excited. So, that being said, let's dive right on into our case for this week. This case is our last No Solve November case. I know it's December 1st, and I know November is over, but I still wanted to put this one out there for you guys. We've all been to the point where we're sick in bed, whether it be a headache, chest cold, the flu. We've all had the luxury of also having amazing over the counter medications to help us. These medications are highly monitored by the FDA, and we're so thankful for that. We trust these medications to make us feel better. Imagine, though, taking medication that is trusted and it's not actually safe. It's making you sicker. Today's case is going to talk about just that. On September 29th, 1982, a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman woke up not feeling well. Anyone who has kids knows they can go from good to sick in like 2.5 seconds. Mary lived in Elk Grove Village, Chicago, and she was just trying to live her life as a 12-year-old. Her father, Dennis, decided to keep her home from school, and her mother decided to go to work. As Dennis was with her that morning, Mary said that she needed to use the bathroom. She went to the bathroom, she took an extra strength Tylenol, and her father heard her go into the bathroom and then heard something drop. He called for her, asking, "Mary, are you okay?" And there was no response. He called again, "Mary, are you okay?" And again, there was no response from Mary. With no response on the second call, he did decide to open the bathroom door, and that's where he found his daughter on the floor, still in her pajamas and unresponsive. Dennis immediately called 911 and his wife to let them know what was going on. Mary's mother was at work, and her dad called her and told her that Mary was having trouble breathing and to get home as quickly as possible. I'm sure that the mother rushed home as quick as she could, but upon arriving, she could not even get within 100 feet of her daughter due to police, ambulance, and emergency service vehicles. She saw her daughter on a stretcher being put into the ambulance, and that was the last time she would see Mary alive. She was asked what she knew about the morning that Mary got sick, and she responded saying that her husband told her, "You don't want to know what happened in the bathroom that morning." He never told her what happened, but it was described as a horrific scene that he spared his wife from ever having to know the truth. He has to live with seeing what happened to their daughter that morning, but he let his wife live her life not knowing. That may have been some comfort to his wife, because what happened was terrible. Mary was taken to the hospital where she was administered multiple different medications to try to save her, but nothing worked. With no answers as to what happened to Mary, she sadly passed away at 9:56 that morning. An autopsy would be ordered due to her age, and those results would come back later. On September 29th, Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker and Polish immigrant, was also not feeling well. Believing he was just coming down with a cold as well, he decided to stay home from work. At noon, he picked up his two children from preschool, stopped on the way home at Jewel grocery store to grab necessary foods, including steaks for dinner and lilies for his wife, Teresa. He met Teresa in Poland, and she spoke little to no English, so he was doing the best he could. After having lunch with his family, he decided to go lay down and rest and try to feel better. After leaving the room, he lay down. He comes staggering back into the kitchen where he quickly collapses to the floor. Teresa ran out of the house not knowing any English and luckily ran into two neighbors, one of which was a Polish-speaking nurse for the local hospital. She asked for help from the nurse and they called for help. Adam was taken to Northwest Hospital in Arlington Heights, Chicago, where he was unfortunately pronounced dead at 3:15 p.m. A nurse spoke to Teresa through the neighbor, and she told the nurse everything that happened that day, including that he had picked up Tylenol at Jewel when he went there that afternoon. He had two brothers. His brothers were Joseph and Stanley. Joseph went and got his brother Stanley, and they went to the hospital where the family was told that his death was due to a heart attack. This was unbelievable for the family, though, because there was no history of heart problems in the family, and Adam was a young, healthy 27-year-old man. How would this man just drop over dead from a heart attack? The same day, September 29th, Mary Lynn Reiner, who was 27 years old as well, and a mother of 4, including her newborn baby, Joshua, who was only 5 days old, had just come home from the hospital. Her husband, Ed, and her mother-in-law and her kiddos were all at home with her. Her mother-in-law was there to help Lynn with anything that she needed, and her mother-in-law would go on to tell about how Lynn told her that she was feeling nauseous. She got up to go to the kitchen. She began to feel dizzy and lightheaded, and noticing something was wrong, her mother-in-law came to her aid. Ed walked into the house to pure chaos. Lynn was having labored breathing. Her mother-in-law told Ed to call for help. While on the phone, Lynn fell to the floor and began to convulse. At 3:45 p.m., Winfield policeman Scott Watkins arrived at the home with the paramedics and the fire department. The paramedics worked tirelessly at the home before taking Lynn to Central DuPage Hospital, and at 9:15 on September 30th, she would be pronounced dead. Lynn was found to have taken regular strength Tylenol instead of extra strength Tylenol, like the other victims. However, 6 extra strength Tylenol were found in the bottle, 4 of which were contaminated. It is believed that the extra strength Tylenol may have been given to her at her discharge from the hospital, and she had shoved them into the same bottle as the regular Tylenol. As we go back to the Janis family, who is now gathering at the home to talk about funeral arrangements, the day was just beginning to get weird. His mother, wife, his brothers, and Stanley's 19-year-old wife, Teresa, were all at the home. Stanley and Teresa had just married 3 months prior, and the family was distraught. They were crying, embracing each other, and Stanley and Teresa started to have headaches. Around 5 p.m., Stanley came to sit and talk to the family and reportedly just fell over. They called 911 as quickly as possible, and he was taken to the hospital. Once there, it was reported that the family was together, and Stanley reportedly had back problems, and he had asked his wife Teresa to get him some Tylenol due to his headache and back pain. She grabbed the Tylenol, as most of us would, and gave him 2. Stanley took 2, and then Teresa took 2 for her headache as well. As paramedics worked on Stanley at the home, fearing they were losing him, his wife walked up crying his name. She stood next to Fire Lieutenant Chuck Kramer, and she let out a groan and then collapsed to the floor as well. Her eyes were fixed and dilated, and he was just not sure that this was a heart attack. Joseph's wife was called at this point, and no one knew what exactly was going on. She told her daughter that they would go pray and just hope for the best. Unfortunately, Stanley would pass away at 8:15 that evening, and on Friday, October 1st at 1:15 p.m., Teresa would be taken off life support and pronounced dead. The day was not over with the Janus family, though, who had now lost 3 members of its family. 31-year-old single mother of 2, Mary McFarland, who worked for Illinois Bell, which was the only phone company in existence. It was Bell Phone Company, which would actually become AT&T at a later date, had gone out for dinner with a coworker on the night of the 29th. She returned to work around 6:45 p.m. and she had a headache. Headaches were really common at Bell Phone because of the location where she worked. It had the flickering overhead fluorescent lights. She went into the break room, and about 10 minutes later, she complained to a coworker that she didn't feel well, and she collapsed. Her coworkers attempted to provide CPR, and they did call 911. When the paramedics arrived, they asked if she had taken anything, and her coworkers stated that she had taken Tylenol for her headache. She was taken to Good Samaritan Hospital, where her family was told that she suffered a stroke. Mary would unfortunately be pronounced dead at 3:15 a.m. on September 30th. This day was horrific. It was horrific for families. It was horrific for the first responders involved. And Chuck Kramer said that it was one of the worst calls he had ever been on when he went to the Janus family. He felt horrible that the family had lost 3 of their family members and no one knew what was happening. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end of the story. At this point, authorities were unaware of any connection to any of the cases, as they were all taken to different hospitals. Chuck Kramer, however, knew about the weird deaths in the Janus family. He was starting to put the pieces together. At 7 p.m., he called his friend Helen Jensen, and he spoke with her. Helen was a nurse at the hospital that they had taken the entire Janus family to, and she had gathered information from all of the families. On just the information that the family members had given, all of the members had taken Tylenol. She decided to go to the house with a police officer and search this lead. She went to the bathroom, found the bottle of Tylenol, took it to the kitchen, opened it, and counted the pills. She noticed 6 pills were missing and 3 people were dead. She decided it was the Tylenol. It was a 50-count bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. When she counted it there were 44 left, with a recommended dosage of 2 pills per serving. She also found the receipt for the pills from the Jewel grocery store that day. She was not done there, though. She took all of her proof to the medical examiner at the hospital. The police laughed at her and told her there's no way it could be the Tylenol. She laid out all of her gathered evidence, and they just ignored her. Chuck, like most firefighters, had friends in different houses, and one of them was Lieutenant Philip Capaldi. Phil called Chuck and asked him how he was doing, and he told him everything. Phil goes on to tell Chuck the story of a woman that worked with his mother-in-law who had lost her 12-year-old daughter that morning. Chuck then calls Helen and told her about the case and how they had similar cases with all the symptoms, and Helen was suddenly believable. The next morning, Chuck would be called into headquarters, where he was told that it was definitely the Tylenol. With this discovery, they now connected the death of 12-year-old Mary Kellerman to the deaths of the Janus family. They were stating that Tylenol was the cause of death for all 4 of these victims. Police brought the bottle of Tylenol from the Kellerman home to the medical examiner as well, and he had already had the pills from the Janus house thanks to Helen. He noted that the bottles had the same lot number, and after discovering this, he decided to call his boss. His boss was Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Edmund Donahue. Edmund Donahue was at home at the time of this call, but he instructed Nicholas Pichos to open the bottles and smell inside. As he opened the bottle and poured the pills onto the counter, he noticed a distinct almond smell. The presence of the almond smell confirmed the suspicions that Dr. Donahue had. He knew instantly that it was the smell of cyanide. Cyanide is a rapid-acting poison that gives off a distinctive almond scent. It works by cutting off oxygen to the red blood cells of the body. Unfortunately, however, the almond scent given by cyanide is only noticeable by about 60% of the population. Thankfully, Nicholas was one of those 60%. After discovering the cyanide, Dr. Donahue called the county's chief toxologist, Michael Schaefer. He asked Michael to run a full toxology report on the pills that they had, asking them to work through the night if they had to get this testing completed. The testing would show that 4 of the remaining pills in the Janus bottle had between 550 and 610 milligrams of cyanide. This is nearly 3 times the amount needed to kill one person. On September 30th at 5:30 a.m., the public was now finding out about what was going on. Public officials started off by telling people to flush the Tylenol down the toilet. For their safety, just take all Tylenol and flush it down the toilet. This was later changed to asking people and stores to turn their Tylenol into the police to be tested for cyanide. Things in the beginning were very foggy due to the fact that the Janus and Kellerman extra strength Tylenol had the same lot number. They did focus on that, and it was just this lot that was poisoned. However, they would find out that the other lots had been contaminated as well. Chicago decided to recall all of the Tylenol in the Chicago area. And at this point, they thought they had found all of their victims. Unfortunately, that just wasn't true. 35-year-old United Airlines stewardess Paula Prince was noticed by her coworker Jean Levengood to not have picked up her paycheck from October 1st. When she asked about it, Jean was told that Paula was a no-show for work on the 30th. This was concerning to Jean, so she decided to call Paula's sister. They went to Paula's apartment, concerned for her. They opened the door and found Paula on the floor. Paula was seen on a security camera at Walgreens Pharmacy around 9:15 on the 29th, buying a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. You have to remember that this is 1982, so CCTV footage was not something that was very common in that time. The fact that they found Paula on camera buying a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol on the 29th was an amazing break in the case. She purchased the Tylenol and then she went home to get ready for bed and took some Tylenol. Paula would be the last victim of this tragedy, thanks to the hard work and dedication of Chuck, Helen, the police department, medical examiner, and the city of Chicago putting out for people to not take any more Tylenol. As the investigation into what happened began, there were more questions than answers. Was it a mistake at a manufacturing plant? Was it done on purpose? How did the contaminated pills get into the bottles? Johnson & Johnson is the parent company of Tylenol, and they produce and manufacture the pills in their plants. They were asked if they had cyanide on the premises of any of their manufacturing facilities, and they said no. But this was a lie. Some thought that maybe accidentally the cyanide got mixed into the pills. But seeing as how only 8 contaminated bottles were confirmed to be found, and in those bottles only a few pills in each bottle were contaminated, the contents of the contaminated pills was also pure cyanide. It was not mixed with any other chemical ingredients, indicating that these pills were purposely filled with cyanide. As police continued the investigation, they came to the conclusion that the pills had most likely been put into the bottles after they were distributed. This thought process would, however, be put into question when they look back at Lynn Rayner's case, as her bottle was regular strength Tylenol, and the only pills contaminated were the extra strength Tylenol that was distributed to her at the discharge from the hospital after her son's birth. They believed all of this, though, because all the poisonings happened on the same day, and all the bottles were purchased within 24 hours of the poisoning. This shows that the pills were most likely placed on the shelves on the 28th, and they were at the front of the shelf, meaning that that's the first thing you're going to grab. They did believe that it was a random citizen who had no employment and drove around the Chicago area distributing the bottles. Tips started coming in, and as the police do, they looked into them. One tip came that was said to be highly credible and made a lot of sense, but it was backburnered due to the fact that it was made by a psychic who was said to have used psychic writing. Psychic writing is where they claim to allow another person or entity to write without consciously doing it themselves. On October 9th, police would receive a phone call from a local Irish pub located in Lincoln Park. The pub's name was O'Rourke's Tavern, and the owner, Marty Sinclair, called the police because a patron named Roger Arnold had come in carrying a baggie of white powder, claiming it was cyanide. He also stated that he had killed people using it. Roger was described as a 48-year-old, wiry, chain-smoking warehouse worker. He was also said to be a peculiar bird who had test tubes, guns, and vials of cyanide at his home. On October 11th, he was arrested at another pub named Lily's Bar. He was arrested on an outstanding warrant for aggravated assault, and the police searched his home with his permission, and they confiscated a bolt-action rifle, 4 handguns, and a stockpile of ammunition. He was charged with failing to register his weapons, as well as the aggravated assault. He was held without bail so they could pursue questioning for the Tylenol murders, and it was strange because Roger actually worked for Jewel Distribution Center since 1969. Guns and ammo, however, they were not the only things that they found at Roger's home. The information found was definitely odd. They found a stash of Soldier of Fortune magazines, the Anarchist's Cookbook, The Poor Man's James Bond, which is a handwritten book by right-wing survivalists and former Minuteman Kurt Saxon. They also found United States Department of Defense manuals for Special Forces training from the 1960s, including manuals on incendiaries, booby traps, unconventional warfare devices, military chemistry and chemical agents, a large quantity of specific hair gel that was used in some bomb-making recipes, and a suspicious bag of white powder, and instructions on encapsulating cyanide. This guy was looking really suspicious at this point. The powder would be tested and it was found to be a harmless carbonate, and a lieutenant would say that a series of coincidences had surfaced when Roger talked to investigators. These coincidences included Roger telling the police that he did have cyanide until August. He had threatened to kill his estranged wife with cyanide capsules. He worked at a warehouse that distributed the contaminated pills. And he worked with the father of one of the victims. He also apparently told several bars about killing people with cyanide. However, unfortunately, there was just not enough evidence and he was released on bond. He was monitored by the police, and Roger subsequently was arrested and sentenced to 30 years in prison for killing a man outside of a bar in 1983. It was said that he killed the man due to mistaken identity, thinking that he was Marty Sinclair, who had called and reported him to the police. However, Roger said that they argued he had a gun on him for protection, and the gun went off, accidentally killing him. He would later say from jail, "I killed a man, a perfectly innocent man. I had a choice. I could have walked away." He only served 15 years of his sentence before being released, and he did end up passing away in 2008. On November 1st, the police would begin to look at another man named Kevin Masterson. Kevin supposedly had a grudge against the store Jewel, which is where the Janice and Kellerman families both purchased their Tylenol. He also was reported to have told someone in September that now is the time to get even. It was reported to the 18th Circuit Court in DuPage that Kevin was angry with Jewel stores after his wife felt like she was mistreated by the security of Jewel stores. They held her on suspicion of shoplifting. A civil suit was filed by Kevin and his wife in 1975, and in 1979, a settlement was reached, awarding Kevin's wife $8,000. He even blamed this incident for the ending of his marriage. Although these facts came out, it was still said that he was not a definite suspect. A source was quoted as saying, "There's still nothing to indicate Masterson is anything other than a guy with a big mouth. There are some questions to ask him, and it would take a quantum leap from what we know to connect him to the Tylenol killings." He was eventually eliminated as a suspect after turning himself into the police from California, where he was now currently living, and the investigation continued. The investigation was still going, and police started to look at the possibility of the attack being focused on one person, but that others were just used as collateral damage to try to cover their tracks. Lynn Reiner's father actually worked for Jewel grocery store as well. Her father's name was Howard Fearon, and the police speculated that it was possible that Lynn was the real target, and that Howard, her dad, Ed, her husband, and Roger Arnold all worked together to do this. It was suggested that they worked together to take out their one true target, which was Lynn, and having others be killed as a distraction and to take suspect away from them. Howard and Ed were questioned, and when Ed was in custody, they asked him to take a polygraph test. He agreed, stating that he was innocent. He didn't kill his wife. Ed was accused of being the ringleader. His anxiety was high, and wanting to put an end to all of this, he took the lie detector test. And he passed. He did not lie, according to the test, but lie detector tests cannot be used to find the guilt or innocence of a suspect. The police could not ultimately prove that they even wanted to kill Lynn, or how they would know that she would pick up a bottle laced with the cyanide pills. However, again, her bottle was not laced. The pills that Lynn took that were laced came from the hospital when she was discharged. The case against Howard and Ed ultimately did crumble, and on October 6, 1982, Johnson & Johnson would receive a letter. They received a letter that read, "As you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves. And since cyanide is inside gelatin, it is easy to get the customer to swallow the bitter pill. Another beauty is that the cyanide operates quickly. It takes very little, and there will be no time for countermeasures. If you do not mind the publicity of these little capsules, then do nothing. So far, I have spent less than $50. It takes me less than 10 minutes per bottle. If you want to stop the killing, then wire $1 million to bank account number 8449597 at Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago. Don't attempt to involve the FBI or local Chicago authorities. With this letter, a couple of phone calls by me will undo anything you can possibly do. Johnson & Johnson did reach out to authorities for help, and the police, however, did not feel like it was a good lead. They felt it was a hoax written by a kook, and they didn't really want to follow up on it. All the evidence from the letter did was lead them to one person. It led them to Frederick McCahey. The letter was postmarked from his business, and the bank account did belong to him. However, both his business and the bank account were no longer open. This made police believe that he was being framed. Frederick would go on to share with police that there was a couple named Robert and Nancy Richardson who did hold a grudge against him. Police looked for the couple only to find that Robert and Nancy were not their real names. It was just one of their many aliases. Robert was reported to have at least 17 different aliases. Their real names did come out, though, and they were named James and Leanne Lewis. They had a grudge against Frederick because Leanne had worked at Lakeside Travel Agency, which was the business that Frederick owned. And apparently, he was misappropriating funds. Due to him misappropriating the funds of the business would close in April of 1982. The business issued final checks to all of the employees, including Leanne, and when she attempted to cash her check for $510, it bounced. And that wasn't the only problem. The currency exchange, where Leanne had attempted to cash the check, now sued Leanne to recover the funds for the $510 check. She was not the only employee affected by this either, and they did end up filing a claim with the Department of Labor. A hearing was held in August of 1982. Frederick did not appear, and due to there being no money, Frederick was not ordered to pay anything. Leanne, James, and Frederick did argue, and Frederick threatened Leanne at one point. James also lost his job in August of 1982, and the Lewises were now unemployed. As we stated earlier, there was security footage of Paula purchasing her Tylenol, and in the video, in the background, there was a man that looked very similar to James Lewis. Authorities then, due to that, put out a nationwide manhunt for the Lewises. And instead of turning themselves in, James just sent them a note. In the note, he says that they are not responsible for the murders. And the Illinois Attorney General responded. He said the Attorney General urged for the Lewises to turn themselves in. He was saying that they would help them prove their innocence, and he would make sure that they were safe. On December 13th, a librarian called the FBI, stating that there was a man who looked just like James Lewis in the library on 40th and 5th Avenue in New York City. He was arrested at the library in New York that same day. James insisted that he had nothing to do with the murders. He did, however, admit to writing the letter to Johnson & Johnson. He said he didn't want the money, but he did want to bring to light the shadiness of Frederick. The police started to have James envision what it would be like to be the Tylenol killer. They told him to talk about it. They said that they would use it to help catch the real killer. But instead, they used it against him in court. He was convicted of extortion due to the writing of the letter in 1983. However, he wasn't really trying to extort anyone, as the money couldn't have actually been sent to the bank account. He spent 12 years in federal prison for the extortion event. He stood firm until his death on July 9th, 2023, at 76 years old, that he did not commit the Tylenol murders. While in prison, James did offer his services to try to help find the killer. He had thoughts on how the killer may have done it, one of them being a drilled hole method, which is where someone drilled holes into a piece of board to hold the empty capsules and then would put a mound of cyanide on it, pulling it across to fill them with a butter knife. He was very adamant that this was just speculation. Because if he said that it was not speculation, they could use that as an admission of guilt. The drilled hole method is very similar to a method that is used by pharmacists nationwide to fill capsules at a pharmacy. So it's not like it was a new idea. But James thought of it and he sent in illustrations of what it could have looked like. This is very telling, but very concerning. And again, if he had not said that it was speculation, he could have had that used against him as an admission of guilt. James was the prime suspect for the Tylenol killers from this point moving forward. But there was no clear proof that James actually did this. With James being the prime suspect in the case went cold, and there was never any full closure. James was an easy suspect due to his history while growing up. He was abandoned by both of his parents as a toddler. He was adopted, and when he was 18, he was charged with assaulting his parents. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he said that it was all an elaborate plan by his whole family for him to avoid the draft. He went on to go to college, where he met Leanne and became married. They were living a great life, and they ended up having a daughter named Tony Ann. Tony Ann had Down syndrome, and unfortunately she would pass away at 5 years old during a surgery to correct a heart issue. Heart issues in children with Down syndrome are very common, and they do go through surgery very often. However, the Lewises did feel like the surgery and the medications used were the reason that Tony Ann died. They did say that they wanted to attempt to sue the hospital for the use of a Johnson & Johnson medication that they felt caused her death. When they were running a tax office, as he was a tax specialist, a neighbor of theirs, Mr. West, was found dead in his attic. The same day that Mr. West was found dead, James had tried to cash a check for $5,000 from Mr. West. It was returned as possible forgery, and they did find that the neighbor had his legs severed at the hips and his body had been hoisted by a rope with a slip knot similar to a rope in the back of James's car. James was taken into custody and he was released. And then James told the police that the check that was given to him was a loan for his business expansion, and that he even had a typed promissory note between him and Mr. West. The strange thing, however, was that Mr. West was said to be very tight with his money. Even one time he lent someone $5 and they told him he was being a big spender. James was charged with capital murder, but the case was dismissed because the police had failed to read James his Miranda rights, making all evidence gathered after that point inadmissible. They also said the police had no probable cause to arrest him in the first place. And the original indictment was ruled defective because they omitted the term felonious. In 1981, he now had charges against him for fraud. His fraud charges came because he apparently was having the IRS send people's tax checks to him and not to the people. He also was apparently misappropriating funds at his tax office. Him and his wife would now go on the lam, and they would change their names and have multiple different aliases. His history painted the picture of a terrible, untrustworthy person who could have been involved in so many criminal acts, including the Tylenol murders. He, however, would continue to say that he was never a fraud. He did not lie, cheat, or kill to get anywhere in his life. When looking more into him and his past, they were able to match a thumbprint to the hoist found at the death of Mr. West. However, they could never actually charge him for this as the hoist rope went missing. James Lewis seemed like he could be very guilty, but again, there was no definitive proof. James and Leanne were living in New York at the time of the murders, which could prove that he was not guilty of these murders. It would have taken him hours to travel back between Chicago and New York, and there was also no absolute proof that he was even angry with Johnson & Johnson. The claim that he wanted to sue them was just speculation. James and Leanne were also seen every day from September 6th until his arrest in December. There is one good thing that came from the Tylenol murders, however. Due to the tampered pills, Tylenol pulled all of the medication from the shelves nationwide. And instead of letting this end the production of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson made the tamper-proof precautions that we still see to this day. They added glue to the cardboard box that held the Tylenol. They put a plastic shrink wrap around the outside of the bottle. They also put a paper covering on the inside of the lid. These now tamper-proof bottles were on the market again. This, I know, did not stop a lot of people after the Tylenol murders to slow down or stop using Tylenol altogether. I talked to my mother about this case, and she stated that after that, a lot of people she knew would not use Tylenol. And she, to this day, does not use Tylenol. It was a scary point, and it scared a lot of people into a fear of the unknown. Other companies would quickly adopt the use of the tamper-proof seal for the protection of their products and to stop this from hopefully ever happening again. This case was never truly solved. There are speculations that there were more bottles out there than what was found, and they always suspected that people may have committed these murders, but with a lack of evidence or CCTV, there's not much to go on. Police only checked a certain amount of bottles for cyanide. And in the beginning, the public was told to destroy their bottles. So there may have been way more bottles out there that were contaminated than what was found. The fact that 7 people died taking their first pill from these brand new bottles is very unlikely that those were the only bottles distributed into the world. This case has been looked at by many sources: police, investigators, FBI, and even Netflix recently did a documentary on it. There are more questions than answers at this point in this case. Was it one person? Was it more than one person? Was it a distribution issue? Was it contamination on the Johnson & Johnson side during manufacturing? Was it done by rack jobbers? If you don't know what a rack jobber is, a rack jobber is part of the distribution chain. They are hired by the distributor to go into the store, and they will stock the shelves with the products in their allotted space, but the stores don't have to hold the product in their area. So it saves them storage space. Rack jobbers could be one of the best theories, as no one would suspect someone whose job it is to fill the shelves as doing anything wrong. It would make sense that it would also be rack jobbers due to the large distribution area of the bottles. Any of these things could be true, and at this point, there is no real answer. That is my case for today. And like I said, that is my last case for No Solve November. I'm so thankful for all of you for being here and going on this ride with me. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, or anything, please comment below. I do have a Discord as well that is linked in my bio. If you have any case suggestions that you want me to talk about, I will happily look into anything. If you enjoyed being here today, please like and subscribe so I can continue to be here for you guys every week. Again, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday, and I will be back next week with a new case. Thank you so much and have a great day.